Hey there viewers! Consider yourself lucky. If you're watching this video, you most likely live in a society blessed by a functioning legal system. You also probably live in a society which makes an attempt to fairly and efficiently deliver justice, especially in the case of capital punishment. However, during earlier times when there was no hard-written criminal laws, brutal tortures were a common method to serve as punishments. For most of history, capital punishment was focused on drawing it out long enough that the victim would be put through as much hell on earth as possible before dying. And in today's video, we'll tell you about a few of humanity's most brutal punishments. From punishments like scaphism, rat torture, elephant execution, impalement, to the Roman candle and more. Watch until the end to learn about all of them. Number 1. Scaphism. This was an ancient Persian method of execution where a person was stripped naked and placed in a tree trunk. Only their head, hands, and feet were allowed to protrude. They were then force-fed milk and honey until they developed a severe case of diarrhea. All of their exposed skin would be covered in honey to attract insects while they were left floating in a stagnant pond. As the person's feces accumulated, the insects it would attract would begin to eat and breed within their skin, which would become increasingly gangrenous. Death could take over 2 weeks and was likely the result of starvation, dehydration, and shock. Number 2. The rack. The rack was a torture and punishment device used during the Middle Ages throughout Europe and parts of Asia. The purpose of this device was simple: slowly stretching every joint in the victim's body to induce almost unbearable pain. Suspects or convicts were chained by their wrists and ankles to rollers located on both ends of the wooden frame. The chains were then slowly retracted using a ratchet mechanism attached to the rollers, causing the joints to stretch and even fracture. The last known use of such a torture mechanism was done in the 18th century in Russia. Enjoying this list so far? Well, keep watching because there's a lot more good stuff coming up. But before moving on, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more amazing videos like this and hit the bell icon so you don't miss any updates. Number 3. Iron Maiden. Often described as the most excruciating torture device made in the Middle Ages, the Iron Maiden sure lived up to its reputation. A typical Iron Maiden design was similar to that of the sarcophagus. Earlier models were created with holes instead of protruding spikes, although long spears were manually pushed inside. Not only did victims suffer from grievous puncture wounds, but also claustrophobia. Torturers were often careful not to impale vital organs, which would end the victim's life instantly. Perhaps the most famous Iron Maiden ever built was that in Nuremberg, also called the Nuremberg Virgin. It was first publicly displayed in 1802. Number 4. Sawing. Sawing people to death was actually a really popular form of execution in the ancient world. The Romans, Persians, Jews, and Egyptians all sawed people to death. Methods varied, but the most horrendous type of sawing was one where lawmen would string criminals upside down, spread eagle, and saw them from the anus or vagina to their abdomen, where they would bleed to death slowly. Because they were upside down, the blood would rush to their heads, which would keep the criminal conscious throughout the whole horrific process. Sawing people as a method of execution disappeared not with the end of ancient times, but in the 1820s or 30s. This happened with the weakening of the Ottoman Empire and the conquest of Vietnam by the French. Number 5. Rat torture. This is the one where a bunch of rats were placed on a criminal's stomach, chest, or buttocks and covered with a pottery bowl, open side face down. Then hot charcoal was placed on either end of the bowl so that the rats would have no choice but eating through the victim if they wanted to escape the heat. Rat torture is alleged to have been used as currently as the 1980s by military governments and intelligence agencies in Latin America. In 1980s Argentina, Jewish prisoners had a tube filled with starving rats forcibly inserted into their anus. Number 6. Breaking wheel. This awful method of execution, also known as the French wheel or the Catherine wheel, involved strapping a criminal to a spoked wooden wheel and breaking all of the bones in their body, starting with their legs. The origins of this method of execution are unknown, but it's believed to have been invented in the Holy Roman Empire during the Middle Ages. Aside from breaking the bones of convicted witches or suspected sectarian enemies, the breaking wheel was used by slave owners in the New World to crush rebelliousness well into the 19th century. Oh, and the bone breaking was only the first part of the 2-part act. After all the bones were crushed with a mallet or hammer, the body of the still alive criminal was transferred onto a second wheel and threaded through the spokes before being hoisted up in the air for the passerby to view at their pleasure. The birds and other scavengers that eventually came to pick the meat of the criminal's bones ensured, according to the medieval superstition, that said criminal's soul would never have reached heaven. Number 7. Elephant execution. This method of punishment was occasionally used in the Western world. However, it was more common in the South and Southeast Asia, especially in India. This form of capital punishment was used from the Middle Ages until the 19th century. The most common way that the execution by elephant was carried out was for the beasts to crush its victim to death with brute force. The elephant was considered to be smart and easily trainable compared to many other wild animals. They could even be taught to torture criminals or execute them slowly. As an example, an elephant could be commanded to break a criminal's limbs before crushing his skull. Some elephants were also trained to slice criminals to pieces with pointed blades fitted to their tusks. In the former Kingdom of Siam, now Thailand, elephants were trained to toss their victims into the air before crushing them to death. In the Kingdom of Cochin, China, now South Vietnam, criminals were tied to a snake and an elephant would charge into them and crush them to death. Number 8. The Brazen Bull. Legend has it that during the 6th century BC, a brass worker named the Perilous of Athens designed what is arguably the most sadistic torture method to date, the Brazen Bull. In this device, the victim would be placed inside the hollowed brass bull with a fire lit underneath. A system of tubes inside the statue would then amplify the victim's screams to sound like a raging bull. The story goes that the tyrant ruler, Phalaris, was so appalled by the device that he tricked Perilous into entering the bull to be its first victim. Number 9. The Blood Eagle. This was a technique ascribed to ancient Norse warriors. The Blood Eagle mixed brutality and poetic imagery in a way that only the Vikings could. First, the victim's back would be hacked open and the skin ripped apart, exposing the spinal column. The ribs would then be snapped from the spine and forcibly bent backwards. This was done until they faced outwards from the body, forming a pair of bloody, shattered eagle's wings. As a horrifying finale, the lungs would then be pulled from the body cavity and coated with stinging salt, causing eventual death by suffocation. Number 10. Impalement. Most famously used by Vlad the Impaler, 15th century ruler of Wallachia and inspiration for Count Dracula. The act of impalement has a long, grim history. Images tend to depict people skewered through the midsection and then held aloft, resulting in instant death. But in reality, the process was a much longer, horrifically drawn-out ordeal. Traditionally, the stake would be partially sharpened and planted pointed up in the ground. The victim would then be placed over the spike as it was inserted partway into the rectum or vagina. As their body weight dragged them further onto the pole, the semi-greased wooden stake would force its way into their body, piercing organs with an agonizing slowness as it eventually penetrated the entire torso. This would eventually tear an exit wound through the skin of the shoulder, neck, or throat. According to some accounts, it would take the victim who was exposed, bleeding, and writhing in torment agony as long as 8 whole days to die. Number 11. Roman Candle. A rumored favorite by the mad Roman Emperor Nero, this method saw the subject tied to a stake and smeared with flammable pitch. It could be a tree or plant resin. Then they were set ablaze, slowly burning to death from the feet up. What sets this above many other similar methods is the fact that the victims were sometimes lined up outside to provide the lighting for one of Nero's evening parties. Number 12. The Cradle of Judas. The Cradle of Judas, also known as Judas' Chair, was a pyramid-shaped wooden structure or chair which was forced into the perineum region of the one accused. With the help of ropes, the convicts would be lowered on top of the wooden structure. Torturers then let gravity to slowly stretch one of the most sensitive parts of the human body. Few additional weights were often added to speed things up for the worse. Which one of the punishments did you find the most cruel? Are there any brutal ones that we missed? Let us know in the comment section below. Enjoyed this video? Hit like, share, and subscribe to Curiosity. Wait! Why not fulfill your curiosity by watching these other awesome videos? Go ahead, choose the left or the right video and enjoy.